we're in Luton. Very few people have anything good to say about Luton. That's the reality.
Yeah.
You know, voted worst town. Sort of why it's so important for us to talk to people in Luton who live in Luton, are bred in Luton, doing positive things and encouraging things. Why do you think it's the case that black people, but the youth in general, to a larger extent, are so disillusioned with the way things are? They seem very driven. They don't seem to care too much, etc., etc. They don't believe that they can go far in Luton, or be from Luton and go far.
I don't know, because I'm originally from West London, so I wasn't born and grew up in there. But when I came to Luton seemed like, it sounds bad, but it seemed like a sort of dead end sort of town, as it were.
Okay.
Where there are lots of people with talent, but there's not much outlet for that talent. And so then when let's say there's lots of people that I went to college with who want to become actors and stuff like that, and then they come out of college and they've 2 years of their lives, so it's really hard getting the grades and everything, but then there's no real thing out there.
Okay.
But I think with Luton, especially, a lot of it's down to the media, because the media loves the negative stories, that's what sells. But I just think with the disillusionment of young people is the fact that there doesn't seem to be that many opportunities being highlighted for them. There are amazing companies out there that can help, but they're just not aware of that. It does not been highlighted to them. Okay. And like I say, it's that whole get up and go to actually go out and find it. It does
seem to get a bad rap. There seems to be a lot of vilifying of Luton, etc., etc. I think there may be something to it, but I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as what the rest of the UK may hear about it. But that's my personal opinion.
And that's true, because it's that sort of thing. It's like with anything, even if it's like a small bunch of people doing something, and the vast majority of everyone else is doing a positive thing, it's always that little person that you're hearing about. And so, you never hear about the news. You don't hear in the news of this person done this amazing thing. You do hear that very occasionally, like small captions, but it's always the negative stories that get blown up to this huge thing. So, like recently with the negative stuff that has happened in Luton, it's blown up to the whole town is running with feral gangs. And that's not the case. No. It was just a few individuals doing that, and now that those few individuals have been taken out of the picture by the authorities, nothing's happening.
Not in the minute.
I'm your optimism.
I'm sorry, it just came out. It's true. Not right now, no. But I hear what you're saying. Things are quite quiet about. Man, them got shot. Man, them got stabbed a few weeks back, a few months back, etc., etc. And I guess the message that we want to get across is that nothing happens in Luton that doesn't happen in any other town or city. You've lived in other places. You lived in West London. You've worked in other places, etc., etc. In your view, is Luton really as bad as what people say? Is it any worse than West London? Is it any worse than Manchester, Birmingham, any of these major cities or parts of cities?
I wouldn't say it is. Okay. Because growing up in West London, I've seen stuff like that. And I think Luton obviously it's seen as big because Luton's smaller. It's significantly smaller than London. It's significantly smaller than Manchester. But if you're in Manchester, for example, I'm not saying anything negative about Manchester, but there's regular violence that happens there. But obviously it's not seen as a huge thing because Manchester is a vast place. Whereas Luton, if one thing happens, then the whole town's in uproar about it. But I don't think it's any more negative than any other place in the whole of the UK.
Can I chime in?
Go ahead.
Now, the one thing that I get annoyed about is that every year we have the carnival. Right? Yeah. And that's the biggest one-day carnival in Europe.
Yeah.
And everyone in Luton comes out for that. And the media just rush over it. We got the biggest one-day festival in Europe, for God's sake. I mean, is that not something that
should be celebrated?
But that's what I'm saying, even with the carnival, because it's vastly, I've been there to the carnival twice, and it's been so peaceful, and it's just like everyone just comes together. And then one negative thing happens, and then they'll say the whole thing was a failure, so you know. And you find a lot of the trouble that happens isn't even from people from Luton; it's people coming out from the outside of Luton, causing trouble. And it's only a small minority of people doing that. But then when that happens, it's like, oh, the whole thing was this amazing thing. People come together, children, you know, all these different cultures coming together and actually working in harmony for once. It's this one person who stabbed someone, you know, with a penknife or something. Luton's horrible.
And you know, and that's what that negative thing that stays with Luton for years and years after. You know, if you go back to your personal project like Brick City, it was shot in Luton, it was made in Luton. It used people and actors from Luton. In your view, does that portray a positive feel for Luton? Obviously, it's a piece of theatre at the end of the day. You have to remember, it is just theatre. But what would you say in terms of something like that?
I feel is that when I was doing projects, a lot of the actors are actual kids from Luton. A lot of them weren't even actors. A lot of them were like, we went to a youth club in Luton and just basically spoke to a bunch of kids and started saying, you know, do you want to get involved with this? And they saw the script and said, you know what, this sounds like something that we can relate to. And so they got involved with that. And so even there are some dark themes in Brick City, there is different sort of like pathways. There are positives to it because there shows that struggle that you find. Like one of the characters, he finds himself in a situation where he's fighting against his past. So he was in a negative way, but he's trying to find to make a positive out of himself. And it's just honest. What I would say, there are, you know, there's positives and negatives in the film that it explores, but it's just an honest portrayal of how things are.
I think, you know, at the end of the day, honesty in itself is positive. I think it has to be, you know. There's nothing about honesty that is negative. Depends on how you view it. But no, that's I personally think it's a great thing to live in a community that's so multicultural. That's got people from all over Europe, from America, Middle East, etc., all over the world. Of course, because of the EDL that has sprung up recently, relatively recently, there's this vibe. People might see Luton as you know, from the outside as it's a hub of racism, which I personally don't agree with. What are your thoughts?
Luton, I wouldn't say it's multicultural. It's a place with many races that doesn't really mix. Because if you go through Luton, there are many different people from different walks of life, but they have set areas. I don't think there is racism, like people there's no-go areas and stuff like that, but I do think there is a level of people not really trying to integrate. And I think groups like the EDL just jump on that and and take advantage of the whole situation. And even though the EDL technically started in Luton, that is not my experience of Luton. Because people in Luton are very friendly. No, there's very few people who hold extreme views about the EDL. But yeah, I think there is a problem still there that the EDL do sort of, in a way, bring up the fact that okay, there's lots of like Asian people, there's lots of Polish people, Eastern Europeans, black people, but I think there has to be more of cohesion in the sense of integrating with them, making an effort to, because there is a lot of people saying, oh, this is us, that's us, and not really coming together. So in a sense, there isn't real multiculturalism as you would think. Like
I see what you're saying. I'm hearing you. Okay, issues in Luton, but in terms of racism, it's no racist. There's no more racist than anywhere else.
No, I don't think so. Obviously, there are people like there are idiots everywhere. But to say that it's a racial problem in Luton is absolutely ridiculous. I think that's silly. I think there is that argument, like I was saying, that people making an effort to integrate with each other a bit more, but racism and people that running battles with each other, I've never experienced that. And I've been living in Luton for a little while now, so unless I'm completely unobservant, there's like a wall going outside and I'm walking through it, but oh, it's a nice day, then it's not happening.
You're going to get racism everywhere, and I don't think it's a particular problem with Luton. You know, I do think the issue is more cultural and not racial. So it's more a cultural issue.
Because Luton's a transitional town. We've got the Luton airport and with all the budget airlines and it's direct link to Eastern Europe, so it's constantly changing, the population is constantly changing and so quickly. And you've got these different cultures that are getting forced together. So obviously you know, how are you going to adapt to each other so quickly? So you're going to have those like clashes. But I don't think it's anything racial whatsoever. It's like if I met someone who had a completely different upbringing to me, it's going to take a while for me to get used to that person. This is a normal social interaction. Lots of them blow it up and sort of, you know, making inflammatory comments saying that, oh, it's the racism or everyone hates each other. I think it's completely off the mark, completely. Okay.